welcome to Licensed Poetics, a podcast where aspiring writers talk about books. I'm your host, Derek.
And I'm your host, Fung-Ling. And welcome to a new episode. Today we have a very exciting guest in the studio, in a virtual studio with us today. Kwame, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for joining.
Honor's a bit of a stretch, but we appreciate the flattery nonetheless.
No, I enjoy the chats. I was telling Fung-Ling your last episode on John Green was very nostalgic for me as well, because that was like the ultimate book blogging move into booktube era. So I remember that moment so clearly.
Thank you so much for being a listener of LP. And yeah, we suspected the John Green episode would resonate with a lot of literary nerds out there, which is great.
I feel like the more nerdy you are, I feel like the more it resonates, right?
Derek, would you like to read Kwame's bio? Just to introduce Kwame to LP's listeners.
Okay, cool. Other than being incredibly dashing, Kwame is a freelance audio producer and lapsed writer who loves all storytelling, whether it's podcasts, audio stories, films, stage productions, or books. He's currently finishing an advanced diploma in screen and media at TAFE and studying graduate diploma for radio and podcasting at Afters. Wow, masochistic. He also hosts the Australian audio storytelling program All the Best on FBI Radio 94.5 and has become an expert in studiously ignoring the unfinished novel tucked away in a folder on his desktop. Ooh, that's exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm
I
very good
know.
at that.
Can we talk about how a perfect guest Kwame is for LP? This collaboration should have happened many months ago. He's a lapsed writer with an unfinished novel tucked away in his drawer. And he's also worked for FBI Radio, which is where we met him.
Yeah, no, it's so good. So good to feel, what am I saying? It's so good to meet, fellow writers, lapsed writers, people trying to organize themselves and failing to do so.
We met Kwame when Licensed Poetics produced the Every Literary Podcast Origin Story radio play for FBI Radio. And Kwame was one of our test listeners, I guess. Yeah. And now, I didn't know you are now the host of All the Best.
Yeah, that was pretty recent. It happened in February. Mads, the real host, as I think of them anyways, in my head, was leaving at the beginning of this year, and they did a call out for people who were interested in the position. So I just applied because I really liked the program. So it was pretty cool to be able to fill in the spot, but it's a bit unsettling, like listening to it this morning and hearing the intro and then the wrong voice comes on. I'm like, oh, that's not the host. Who's that guy?
The wrong host, you mean your own voice comes on?
It's like, oh my God.
Well, that's how that's kind of how we all feel about our own voices, right?
Oh my God.
Like, what? Why?
It took me so long to get used to listening to my own voice, because obviously I have to do it when editing these episodes. But yeah, it's a cringe fest most of the time. Derek, when we went on to All the Best to do an interview for our episode, it was Phoebe, the executive producer, who interviewed us. So we've met Mads, but we've never actually had the chance to do an interview with them. But hopefully now that you're the new host of All the Best, we'll get to collaborate with you again on All the Best someday.
Yeah, definitely. We'll try to, asking smart questions, try not to make Derek feel uncomfortable when we listen to his stuff live in the studio in future.
I think people should make me feel uncomfortable. I have no qualms about that. That's exactly how
God.
Existing in the world should make you feel, probably.
When we played the draft radio play at FBI Radio when Kwame was our test audience, Derek was putting his face in his hands the entire time, and he felt so uncomfortable.
And the thing is, it was great. Oh,
thanks, Kwame.
Thank you. I was just, you know what it was? I was actually the whole time kind of seething. I was like, can't believe Fung-Ling gets to worm her way out of acting here. I was so mad that I was the only one who had to act. I'm like, I didn't want to do this.
Okay. Backstory for the listeners. I don't think we've ever revealed this on the podcast. So for the radio play, the original plan was Derek and I were just going to be writers who like write the story, but in the end we ran out of people to do the voice acting, so Derek had to step in and become a voice actor.
Yeah, so the humiliation was entirely mine.
Now, should we get into today's episode, which is a book club episode with a guest, which is always really exciting. So in this episode, you will hear why we picked the book that we picked, which is Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, as you will have seen from the thumbnail. Whether we finished the book, whether we liked it, and we'll also give a synopsis. And in the end, if we have time, you'll hear some Goodreads reviews of the book. So now the big question is, did we all finish the book?
Yes.
I did. Bet you didn't see that coming.
I technically finished it.
Wow, that's terrible. Technically,
I will admit that I skimmed some parts. I will explain why later on in the episode. I will try to justify myself, but I suspect listeners will not forgive me. Kwame, would you like to give a synopsis of the book? Like, I asked Gemini to write a less than 100-word synopsis of the book. And we just have to read it out. How easy?
So I'll read read the synopsis that you've got there. Compliments of Gemini. Synopsis. Matt Ruff's Lovecraft Country merges 1950s Jim Crow America with Lovecraftian horror. Atticus Turner, a black veteran, searches for his father, facing both racist terrors and supernatural monsters. The novel explores family secrets and dark magic, powerfully confronting real-world horrors through a fantasy lens. Also a TV show. I was just going for the exclamation mark there.
I love the zip you got on that. That was great.
Yeah, love that. You can guess that the last sentence was inserted by me, not by Gemini.
Yeah, Gemini doesn't have that level of enthusiasm, I think.
No. So has anyone here watched the TV show? Oh, wait.
Yeah,
Derek has, yeah.
I've watched it. Kwame, have you watched it?
No. I think a long time ago I began the first episode, but like late at night. But I don't think that counts because I slept. So that was about it.
From the synopsis, you can tell that it's I would say, dark fantasy book. And as the title suggests, it's inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. Are people familiar with H.P. Lovecraft?
Yes.
We are very, I think. I think that's
very, very familiar.
Yeah, this is kind of a new thing for you, right? You're not really into cosmic horror or like pulpy horror or anything like that.
No, you're right. But I have read, I think, 1 or 2 short stories by Lovecraft. I may have read the Cthulhu one.
Call of Cthulhu, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember too well because it's a long time ago. But I remember the sort of feeling that H.P. Lovecraft is known for evoking. You know, like dark, fantastical horrors that is not like quite explained. But I think a really important point to bring up now, which is that his horrors are known for having really racist connotations. And I think this book is like a pretty deliberate attempt to subvert that. Whether it was a successful attempt, we can discuss later.
I think that the book is more interested almost in the pulpiness of Lovecraft rather than the cosmic horror. I think Kwame might agree with me as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, and it's funny, and I know that this is later in the episode where we're talking about the Goodreads reviews, but I think there's some stuff there that sort of touches on the absence of dread in certain sections. But yeah, definitely very pulpy, very like loud comic book sort of pow bang kind of vibe to it. And you feel like you're going to have a moment where you're going to get some like deep interiority into a character or situation, and then you just switch to a different perspective and a different narrative instead, and you're like, oh, I thought there was more there. Okay, well, we'll wait till that character comes back, I guess.
Well, I think that's a great summary. I think that's exactly what I felt about this book. So I'm curious, would you say when you're reading H.P. Lovecraft, there is more of that existential or even philosophical interiority, as you said?
Definitely. I definitely say there's a lot of, from a philosophical standpoint, like a very conceptual sort of writer, I think is what H.P. Lovecraft is, but maybe not so much with the characters. I think these characters in the tradition of those pulpy horrors, is a bit one-dimensional. And then, of course, the villains in the story or the characters he tends to represent, especially the ones who fall on the other side of his racial politics, are definitely represented in very nasty ways. So
I see.
That was a really nice and polite way to put it. I would have said something like on the other side of the color wheel, but that's a much more PC way to put
studying radio, so I'm learning how to
to say things the right way,
not get cancelled, I think. So.
I actually think the book is a much more interesting take than I gave it the show credit for when I initially watched the show, because the pulpiness is really obvious, like in book form. I have very positive opinions about it, but I like the kind of like, I do like a bit of lowbrow sort of like pulpy storytelling. So
yeah, I think we should explain when we say pulpy. That's what do we mean, right? I think my take would be the plot has twists and turns and guns. How would you describe pulpy?
Silly. I think silly is like a big part of it. It has to be fun. It has to be something that most people will enjoy. It's like TV, right? It's got a mass appeal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely, you get a lot of caricatures rather than characters, I would find, in that sense.
Yeah, and I think with more like pulpy fiction, you're always reading to see if the character dies or if the character is going to fight the demon or escape the demon. So it's obvious in that way. Like you can just follow along the adventure rather than like figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think we should briefly introduce the author in case there are any Matt Ruff fans listening and they're frustrated that we haven't introduced their favorite author. So Matt Ruff, born in 1965, is an American author known for blending genres. His novels, like Lovecraft Country, mix fantasy, horror, and social commentary. A Cornell graduate, he crafts intricate plots and compelling characters, earning acclaim for his imaginative and thought-provoking narratives. He lives in Seattle. That was also a bio written by Gemini, and I think Gemini is very nice to Matt Ruff.
I will add that I was a bit surprised to find out that Matt Ruff was white when I Googled him, and it was just because I'd read other books in this kind of sort of vein of critiquing H.P. Lovecraft, and they're usually writers of color sort of approaching his stories, but from that lens of whether it's a feminist lens, queer lens, or... So it was interesting, despite who the main characters are in the story, and immediately the first thought I had in my head was, is this a question for own voices stories as well? And, that whole, who has the right to tell this story? That kind of question. But then I was wondering if I was just overthinking it, because, it's not meant. It's
right. Meant to be. It's meant to be fun and genre fictiony. Yeah. It's important to note that the author of this book is white, and so it's definitely worth thinking about. Is he representing all the racism authentically, or does he truly know what he's talking about, or has he made a serious attempt to try to figure out what he's talking about?
I think from reading it, there's a little bit in the back that talks about how he came to come up with the idea for the book.
Do you mean the acknowledgement section?
Yeah, the acknowledgements. Yeah. It's I think it's behind the acknowledgement section. At the end of it, there's a little bit that talks about how he came on to this idea. The book to me is like, the social commentary is like a byproduct almost. It's really like he was like, I wonder what would make someone so terrified that your life would constantly be in danger. And they'd be like, oh, being black, that would make your life constantly in danger in like the 1950s. And then it's like that. And then because he's got genre brain, I guess. And he just went, oh, okay, great. There's a story there. And that's how like the story reads to me. I think I don't actually think it doesn't feel like intentionally subversive or anything like that. It just seems like he was like, oh, this story will work.
Well, you don't think it's intentionally subversive? I think
I don't think he was trying to make any big statement. Like, the fact is that racism existed. It does exist, and you have to deal with the horror of it every day. And by the way, let me represent it as a horror. I feel like there's not much more to it than that. That's my personal feeling. I don't know how you guys felt about it.
I also feel like he didn't make any big statement, and that wasn't really his goal to make a big statement like that. But I think him creating like all of his main characters as African Americans, that was definitely an intentional choice. I think his intention was to, as you said, create a good genre fiction. But yeah, maybe you're right that his intention wasn't to make like a super revelatory statement in that way.
It's interesting to think of it that way, because I think it depends on what your concept of normal is to wonder if what is being subverted. And I guess if he's of the school of people who just accept that racism exists, then what he has done is not really a subversion, not for him anyways, but for someone else who is not sort of experienced racism or have not really seen it before, or a bit in denial, might read it and go, oh my goodness, this is crazy.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that is so true. That is so true. Depends on what your concept of normal is. I imagine if you were really in denial and you read this book, it will definitely teach something new to you. And that's good. I mean, that's respectable. Okay, I think now we should explain why we picked this book for book club. So, Kwame?
So I've got two reasons, and it has to do with H.P. Lovecraft. We talked about, I came across H.P. Lovecraft when I was a lot younger, and I was like, oh man, horror, amazing, love it. And then maybe like years later, there was this Nigerian-American writer who won the World Fantasy Award, and the World Fantasy Award in the US is a bust of H.P. Lovecraft's head. But it was controversial because she kind of didn't really want to accept the award. And that's when I discovered that he had this sort of racist legacy where he'd actually written pieces sort of really demonizing certain races in America. And that's why she felt like, wow, this is the greatest honor of her literary achievement. She's written this really great book. But at the same time, do I want this honor?
Never make an award a bust of someone. That's always a bad idea.
Yeah, there's like definitely like a Roman Polanski bust somewhere. There's like there's
oh.
Yeah, so basically, and that, I guess, led me on to writers like herself and other African-American writers, and not just African-American, but other writers of color, who are all writing in that sort of Lovecraftian vein of that cosmic horror, but they were also critiquing him at the same time. So it was like their characters would be writers of color, characters would be of color, or there would be queer, or there would be whatever. There'd be something that he would be absolutely offended by in real life, and sort of challenging that concept, which is why I go back to my comment about being initially surprised that Matt Ruff was white, because I just assumed when I saw the title that there's just another writer of color doing the same thing again. So I was like, oh wait, I've definitely got this wrong. This is like a different intention, probably.
maybe I'll just go over my reason as well, quick. I'd obviously seen the show before. To be honest, wasn't super memorable. Like I remember certain things you recognize in the book, but I thought, well, I'll give the book a go. And obviously, because you mentioned it, and then I'm not like a huge like Lovecraft fan, but I used to, because it's one of the few, because he's like one of those older writers. He's one of the few writers where you can pull up a PDF on a computer at school and read while you're supposed to be doing work. So that's what I used to do when I like tutor English or whatever.
Oh, that's cute.
I would just like read through his like archive. He's got like this archive. There's like a H.P. Lovecraft archive of like short stories, and they're all easily like available online
free
to read.
Nice.
And that's how I found out that he was racist. I stumbled on like, some of his other writings, and I was like, and whoa. It was like, and then you do a bit of research. You're like, he was so racist. He was racist for his own time. the amount of racist you have to be racist in, was it like the 1930s?
Yeah.
I mean,
because he lived until the 40s, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Check his age, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just like, wow, you must have been so racist to be racist. Other white people were like, I can't get on board with this. That's a...
Wow. This is great. H.P. Lovecraft's audience was definitely white people, right? White people who shared the same fear. And what do you think this book's audience is? Do you think it's also intended for a wide audience, or it also had the ambition to appeal to, people with lived experiences?
I think maybe he was reaching for a wider audience.
Do you say whiter or wider?
Wider, hopefully. Wider, not whiter.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think if he had been aiming for a white audience, I think I would have noticed that and I would have put the book down. But I think because he was genuinely attempting to write an exciting story, that kind of carried the whole thing. And I don't feel like it was appealing to someone with basically a very limited worldview.
I was going to say, I don't think this book, like it has to be, the characters have to be real enough, right? To appeal to like people of color, people with lived experience, people who understand struggles of like racial discrimination. But at its core, like the white audiences would still love this book, right? So I don't think he had to sacrifice anything. Like he didn't like go, well, I'm not gonna cater to a white audience. Like I think this is perfectly catered to a white audience.
Yeah. I think that's what I meant with the story thing, right?
Yeah.
I think this goes back to really the core of fiction writing, like we're all just looking for a good story, an exciting plot with a satisfying ending, like that would appeal to everyone theoretically. And I think I fully respect that.
And I guess the villains, if you want to call them that in the story, are so cartoonishly evil that I think maybe no one would see themselves in those characters. So I guess in that sense, he's not really being subversive. He's not challenging anyone's worldview because you're like, how could anyone be like that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Wow. There's something to be said about villains in the fantasy genre, hey?
I think our standards for fantasy villains are so low. if we're like, they're white, people are like, progressive, crazy. Like, I mean, that's where we're at, right? Like, I mean, certain people did not enjoy the fact that what did we say? We were saying that Tolkien was racist.
Well,
fantasy is a racist genre. And
I mean, that was the problem, right? Kind of the issue
ouch.
here.
We need to drop more controversial takes like that because that one, like, it's viewed like 2,000 times on Instagram and gained us some followers too. Like, that was brilliant.
We're selling out.
Selling out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think we should probably move on to the next part of it, right?
Yes. This book has 8 distinct chapters, which, if it weren't for the connecting characters throughout the 8 stories, I would call this a short story anthology. Because I think the chapters are quite distinct. What does that mean? What was that face, Derek?
I love anthologies. I love them so much. And so this is the perfect format for me. Like, just.
Did you like how there were connecting characters though?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I think it made it a bit more coherent.
It's
why do you like anthologies?
It's a TV. It's because it's what
it's
it
a
is.
TV format. Yeah,
it's a TV format, and like which is like brilliant if you're writing pulp fiction, because that's what pulp fiction is. It's episodic.
Yeah, episodic. True, I agree. So, who are the connecting characters? As we mentioned in the synopsis, there's Atticus Turner, a former soldier of the Korean War, and also a massive science fiction fan. His father, Montrose, his uncle, George, his uncle's wife, I don't know how to pronounce her name.
I think it's Hippolyta. Is that
Hippolyta?
correct? I'm not sure. That's probably completely wrong. Please don't judge me, people.
It's either Hippolyta or Hippolyta, right?
I think that's it. I think you've got it, actually. I think it's Hippolyta.
Hippolyta, right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the love interest, Letitia, and Letitia's sister, Ruby. And the only white guy in the cast of recurring characters, Caleb Braithwaite. I don't know how to pronounce their names.
There's so many ways. In Barbados, we would say Brathwaite, and then I've heard people say Braithwaite. So I don't know.
Yeah, no idea.
Is it a name so white that we can't pronounce it? Usually it's like white people struggling to say.
Oh my god! When I first came to Australia, I had no idea how to say Lachlan, and then I've heard people say the name Lachlan, and I didn't realize that it's spelled like that. And I was confused for the longest time.
So fair.
My favorite is Sean or Sean.
No, was like, what are you talking about? Oh, like the guy in the Lord of the Rings. Like, is his name Sean Bean or Sean Bond? Sean Bean, like you cannot. You have to pick one and make your first and last name consistent.
Scene B.
That's his name from now on.
Sean Bourne. Hey, my favorite actor is Sean Bourne. Wait, you mean Scene Bean?
Exactly.
Oh,
all right.
okay. So yeah, cast of characters. I like them. They are a bit caricatures sometimes. Like when Letitia first appeared, like within the first sentence of her introduction, I was like, dun dun dun, love interest arrives. Okay, so 8 stories. The first one is Lovecraft Country. And for me, I enjoyed the first few stories more than some of the middle ones. Each of the main cast gets their own story. For example, Hippolyta gets a story, and Hippolyta and George's son, the little boy, also gets a story. And the reference is actually not only to H.P. Lovecraft, it's also to some other classic sci-fi fantasy works. Like there's a chapter called Jekyll in Hyde Park, which is obviously a reference to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I have read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I did not like it at all. And I actually prefer the chapter in this book inspired by
the
that.
actual story.
Yeah, I totally do. And I'm sure there are people out there who will agree with me.
I have a general question about like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So if they're the same guy, why is he not Dr. Hyde? Like he still has his PhD. You know what I've been thinking about this a lot. And I
love how that's what you're like fixated on.
Because like that's not fair. Like when but I guess that's the thing with Bruce Banner and the Hulk, right? Like I don't know. I feel like you still have the degree. The degree attaches to the person, not the. But anyway. Exactly,
but like Hyde is a part of himself that he despises, you know. So he definitely does not deserve the doctorate. But I love how you brought up Bruce Banner and the Hulk. I didn't even think in that direction. But yeah, it's the idea of like one person containing 2 identities. And the reason I didn't like the original classic that much is because I just felt like the morality is like super, super on the nose. The Dr. Jekyll is like this upright man with like a tall build and like smooth skin. I think it was literally in there. And then important. When he became Hyde, he's
amazing skincare routine.
when he became
his PhD
Hyde,
was in.
Exactly. Not only like was he morally corrupt, he was also like physically ugly. I'm like, that's so on the nose. But anyway, in this book, Lovecraft Country, in that chapter is Ruby's story. And without spoiling it, it's also a story of one person containing 2 identities.
I really liked that one. That was one of my favorite ones.
I definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably my favorite one has got to be the one with Ruby, and that was the one that I remembered from the show because of how distinct it was.
I see.
It had like just reminded me of like The Substance or something as well. You know, thinking if we're talking about contemporary references.
Is that the recent body horror film?
Yeah. It's just it was like the body horror in the shot was really because it's really great, right? It's very visual, very visceral in the literal sense. I think I also just actually like the first story. Like Lovecraft Country, I think is like my favorite of the
Agreed.
Of the stories. And it just felt like because by the end of it, it becomes a little bit like Scooby-Doo, and I was like, oh well, this is like
I don't understand that
too much. Like, have you ever like watched Scooby-Doo? Like
everyone gets together and solves the crime.
I was gonna say Lovecraft Country, the first one, is also one of my favorites, and I loved the reference to the Green Book. Right, that's actually a film that I have seen, believe it or not. It's a film starring Mahershala Ali and Aragorn.
I think Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah, Viggo, that one.
Viggo, is it Mortensen?
Mortensen or something. Mortensen.
I don't know how to
Something
say
like
his
that,
name. But yeah, it's a great movie. It's about the travel guide, right? I think it was the 1950s, where it's a guide for people who wanted to drive across America, and then it would recommend, I guess, safe routes to take, safe restaurants and hotels to stay at. And in this story, the first story, it's has a lot of references to that. And I thought that was really clever.
I've got a bit of a confession. I didn't realize, and I don't know if this happened to everyone, but I didn't realize it was going to be split into several sort of interconnected short stories. So I thought that was the main plot line, to be honest, when I was going through it, because I was like, this feels pretty solid. I'd seen the trailers for the show, and this was the bit that they most highlighted. So I was like, well, this is the story. And it wasn't until we got to like the second and third story, it's like, what is happening here?
Love the confession. That's exactly how I felt. When I guess I was approaching the close of the Lovecraft Country story, I was like, wait, this is wrapping up a little bit sooner than I anticipated, because I also thought that was going to be the whole thing. But then when the next, I guess, chapter title came up, I kind of flipped through the book and I was like, so it's gonna be like bunch of distinct stories. Yeah, the second one I also really loved. I'll give it a shout out. It's titled Dreams of the Witch House, but it's Witch House. Is that a typo?
It's no, like witch house, as opposed to Dreams in the Witch House, which is the Lovecraft story. Is it Dreams of or Dreams in or something like that? I can't remember exactly, but
you see, I don't get that reference at all because I haven't read that.
If you were reading this as like, I'm going to find out more about Lovecraft, you learned nothing. Like, this is really not this is not Lovecraftian at all.
Appropriating Lovecraftian themes and motifs. Yeah.
Interesting word to use with a white author with African American characters.
Well, he's appropriating H.P. Lovecraft, right?
Yeah.
Borrowing. But yeah, the second story that I really liked, because it's about Letitia pioneering into a white neighborhood, which I had never heard of before, and I think that's a fascinating concept, where a black person purchased the first home in an all-white neighborhood.
The discount rate and stuff like that.
Oh, God. It was pretty eye-opening for me, just because I was pretty ignorant on this specific front of American society. But, oh my God, the way that people will get harassed just for exercising their citizen rights. And it's not that they, like, stole the house. Like, they bought it with their hard-earned money, and that wasn't just good enough. That was not good enough for some people. But yeah, I thought that was pretty eye-opening for me, and I think this story is pretty solid. So I enjoyed the second chapter.
I mean, it's important to remember that they weren't equal citizens yet at that time, because it's still the Jim Crow era, and I think there was still like laws, like schools are still segregated at this point, I think, and and the whole point of having that book of travel spaces is that there are literally spaces that had signs that said white only, in the era of having to sit at the back of the bus kind of thing. So yeah, but it is interesting. You're right. And outside of the American context, that seems almost crazy. Like, you can't imagine it.
It's funny that you mentioned earlier, like Mahershala Ali, because Mahershala Ali also, I think it's Jonathan Majors in the show, but Atticus as black veteran is such a stereotypical character. I feel like I don't know, Kwame, how you feel about this?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's the only way they make it.
They're like, they've survived. Like, it's the most literal, and white authors love it, I think. Because I remember, because Mahershala Ali in True Detective season 3 plays a black veteran who's also a police officer, and that's another show that has a lot of like Lovecraftian elements in it. Probably more Lovecraftian than this book, I think.
I feel it's a character that white American audiences can get behind, because he fought for the country. So we can feel sympathy for this guy because he's been through it. He's different to the other ones.
That is
that's my
that's
harsh,
definitely so true.
that's my harsh perspective on it.
I think that's so true, and it's really sad when you spell it out like that. But I think that's probably the way.
But I'm not gonna lie, like I get behind that character really easily. I think it's also like they were like, if the way to make a black character appealing is make them like as masculine. If they're a dude, make them as masculine as possible. They're like chain smoking in the back of like I get sucked into it every time, right? Like I loved Mahershala Ali in True Detective. I was like, yeah, like I'm.
Well, he's just a great actor.
He was fantastic in that.
Yeah.
So just for anyone listening, we're now moving on to the spoiler section. So if anyone hasn't read this yet, they really want to read it, and you'd like, don't know why you would care about spoilers, frankly, but if you care about spoilers, it's time to just pause, buy the book, read it, and then come back.
Now let's move on to the XYZ question. Woohoo! This is the third time that we're running it for a book club episode now. So the question is, swap XYZ for a word or a phrase and say, this book is very XYZ, and the top 3 most XYZ things about the book are. So it's a really flexible question, and it's totally up to you how you want to use it. So since neither of you came prepared with an answer, it doesn't have to be super hard, guys.
Constantly berated on this show.
Okay, well, I'll drop. I've thought of something while you went through that. So,
well, I berated you. See, that's the point of berating. Like,
it works apparently. This book, I think, was very easy to read, despite the fact that there are lots of these heavy themes within there, and I think what makes it easiest is that we talked about it having that sort of pulpy nature, that episodic nature. It meant that you can skim over things, and I know that Fung-Ling, you mentioned skimming earlier. We still want to know.
I totally did.
You can sort of skip or skim the bits that you're not all that interested in, or it's just dragging on, and then you can move around. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm so not used to that kind of reading, to be honest. I'm so used to, like, when I was reading Sputnik Sweetheart, I was reading every word like twice. I didn't want to miss anything. Whereas this one, I was just like, where's the big finale? Show me the...
Well, it's not literary fiction, right? Where every phrase or word and metaphor and symbolism carefully curated. You can just sort of move on to the plot kind of thing.
So your XYZ was very easy to read, right? And I think I totally agree. Talking about my skimming, I think I just said the top favorite stories for me from this book. And unfortunately, the other stories that I didn't like as much, I tend to do exactly what you said, which is I sometimes skip, I just move on to the plot. Unfortunately, the Hippolyta chapter, the Horace chapter, it's not that I didn't like them. Sometimes I just read them more quickly than usual, but I did read the big finale very carefully. But in terms of being easy to read, though, like, this is a point that I wanted to bring up. I think the writing style is sometimes a little too visual, like too much like a TV show. Derek, do you know what I mean?
I know, but I disagree. But yeah.
For me, a super visual way of writing, this is not image driven. I love imagery. This is different. I think a visual style of writing is when I feel like instead of the author telling the story, the author is describing a movie made of the story or a TV show made of the story. And that kind of writing style, it seems quite popular. I see it a lot. And for me, it makes it harder to read instead of easier to read. Because I'm like, I don't want to be imagining a TV show in my head. I want to imagine a real story. If I wanted to imagine a TV show, I'll just watch the TV show. That's just how I feel. Why do you disagree?
I think that this is the better alternative. Because having seen the show, this is better. Sometimes it is actually better to imagine a TV show than to have actually watched a TV show. Like there's I don't know if you read, like, do you read light novels? You probably don't. I'm assuming you don't.
I used to. I probably don't anymore.
So like light novels, Pulp Fiction is like effectively what a light novel is, right? Like it's episodic. It's supposed to be like digestible. It's very clearly broken up into scenes. Usually it's
Yeah,
like very
scenes.
basic storytelling.
Scenes. Yeah.
I think that actually, I think it helps because if it, I don't know, like I guess maybe it's not that I disagree because I think like maybe you're right. But I also think this is the only way it could be. Like it would be
Ugh.
less success. It would be less good if it wasn't like that.
Hmm.
Like I don't think you can have this sort of story where you're like basically just describing events because that's really what this is, right? It's not there's no interiority to these characters. It's Pulp Fiction. There's not supposed to be any. And when there's no interiority to the characters, then you're doing them a disservice, I think, by like trying to show that there is interiority. Like that makes it a much more complex, and I just don't think that's the point of the book. But obviously, if you don't like that, then you're not going to like this book either. Like
No,
that's,
I get your point, and I think you're right. There shouldn't be an attempt to falsify an interiority when that's not the point.
yeah,
But I don't know why the example that I'm comparing it to is Harry Potter. Well, I also think Harry Potter is the point of it is not exactly interiority. It's just a different way to narrate events that's not so scene driven. I think if the book took more of that approach, it would be better.
but that works better when you're telling. I think but that's like a long form novel. Like
Yeah,
where you're
which
with the
this
characters.
is.
No, it's not really. I mean, you know that. Like we all know that. Call this a novel is a stretch.
I'm just like I would just rather be watching TV then instead of like imagining. Like, do you just not have the money to put together a TV show? Like, I don't think that's the point of literature.
I don't know. I think Pulp Fiction is like very particular, and there's not a lot of examples of it anymore in book form. As far as I'm aware.
So if you read a lot of as I do, I try a lot of science fiction, you won't find Pulp Fiction in this form really, but you'll find like bits and pieces of it. Like it's still like its remnants still exist there, and I guess another example of that would be, and of course when I'm about to say it, I've completely forgot the name of it. But there was this really popular science fiction show that was adapted from a book that was on Netflix and then Prime, and I've lost it. It was, and basically the story, it was long form, but you had these elements of episodicness within it. And I find that for a lot of those types of science fiction stories, where they try to balance the long form with the episodic aspect of it. So yeah, in the genre fiction, you'll find it for sure.
Yeah. I just really enjoyed the Pulp Fiction. Like I liked that it wasn't like a book, and it didn't really make me feel anything other than being like, oh, like
Fun.
there is adventure to be had regardless of whether you're suffering under slavery or not. That's like really that was kind of the
I mean,
story.
I liked the episodic nature of it. That's not the part that made me go, it's too much like a TV show. For me, it's
okay.
still the scene-driven visual narrative. I just don't think that's an efficient way to tell a story in text form, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it might just be a personal thing because I also
think it
struggle with
might.
that. Because like I also end up writing in like scenes.
Oh, you mean when you're writing now?
Yeah. So sometimes like maybe it's just me being like defending myself.
No, I get it. It's such a, because we live to borrow a John Green phrase, we live in an imagery drenched culture. You know, like when we imagine something, we are almost always imagining through a camera. And I don't know, I'm of the opinion that when you're trying to write a novel, that it is something you should resist, because that puts distance between you and the narrative instead of true immersion, or like the higher level of immersion that I think words can bring. I think TV shows should aim for a different goal using that different form. But anyway, this is kind of getting drawn out. But I like that this is a very writerly discussion that we're having. Should I move on to my XYZ?
Can I interject that I've just
Yes.
Googled the title of that
Yes.
game myself? So it's a series called The Expanse, and it was based on these books by James S. Corey. And yeah, so it sort of blends what you're talking about, like what you would expect from a novel in terms of not just being scene driven, but then they're like mini stories within that bigger story that are very sort of scenic. So it's like they blended the large
Oh.
novel form, but then also they have those shorter forms.
Nice. Do you mean for the books or the TV show?
They did it in a TV show, and I read it in the first book, which is the only one I've ever read. But yeah.
I've heard of James as Corey. He's like a
Yeah, he's pretty big in this.
big
Yeah.
sci-fi
Yeah.
author, yeah. So for my XYZ, I was just going to say this book is very nerdy. I'm surprised that no one has brought it up yet. It's very nerdy and very geeky. And I actually like that. I think it made me respect the book and the author a bit more. And when I say it's nerdy, I just meant that the author clearly has read so much H.P. Lovecraft and classic sci-fi, and he made all of his characters be members of book clubs and like comics and everything. And that's just endearing, I mean, as a fellow nerd. But also the author has clearly done a lot of research, made a very respectable attempt at reading Black history. I can't say if the result of his attempt was entirely satisfactory. I don't think I'm the right person to make that judgment, but I can tell that he has read a lot and he has at least truly attempted to understand from reading real historical research. And the reason I know that is because he expositions sometimes a little too much. And coming from, I do this too as a writer. I know, when you've read so much, you don't want to edit it out. But sometimes it gets clunky, and I'm like, I like that you know this, and I like that you know how it's relevant. Your story is constructed based on that. And I'm like, do you really need to tell me this now? It's just a lot of exposition. But again, I respect the attempt. With the bullying of Black neighbors, he cited, I think, some real historical incidents that happened. And then each chapter begins with, sometimes with a news report of, I think, the Tulsa riots. That was the opening of one chapter. And this is a very nerdy take on things. And I like that. Overall, if you're also a classic sci-fi nerd or a Black history nerd, I think you'll appreciate this book for sure.
I will say that I've never identified as a nerd, so I think that's why I didn't pick up as it. I mean, I am a nerd. I've come to accept it now, but before I never. It's like, who are you talking about? Me? No.
Did you really never identify as a nerd, Kwame?
No, I discovered I was a nerd from other people.
I feel like that's the ultimate nerdy thing to do, Kwame. Hate to break it to you.
That's pretty funny.
I'm proudly a nerd, probably because of all the John Green content that I consume. Yeah,
I've also never really identified as a nerd. I obviously like nerdy stuff, but I've never thought about it either. So I think I get that.
I think, Derek, you're less nerdy. You're definitely less nerdy than me, I think.
Because I have done the sports. Is that the
no?
the
Because you watch more TV. I feel like watching TV is cooler than reading.
It's really not. Have you watched someone read a book and you can be like, oh, that's kind of cool. That they look cool when they're reading. Have you watched someone watch TV? Do you know what that looks like?
Yeah. Just imagine someone on their phone in the middle of a cafe. It doesn't have the same impact as the guy on the book in the cafe.
That's exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think these days you'll find more people doom scrolling than reading or watching TV,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think going back to what you said, the Black YouTuber, that reminded me of a reason why I love the first story, Lovecraft Country, so much. Is I think it did something to really make me realize how genuinely terrifying it is to have encounters with the police from, the main character's perspectives. It's every time they encounter the police, whether while they're driving or while they're entering a new town, it's it's consistently bad news. They're not on your side. They are a danger instead of a source of comfort in all circumstances. And I don't know. Obviously, I have read about police brutality and stuff like that, but I'm not super well educated on it. I've never experienced it. So whatever it is in that first story, it did something to help me feel that, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think that was for me also the most maybe affecting story. And I actually think that's probably why he made the character a veteran. You know, like
Mm.
the guy's tough and he's like awesome and he has to constantly deal with being humiliated like every day in his life.
Yeah.
Like every single day of his life, he's like humiliated. Like it's like a whole and you know the other thing as well is that everyone knows that like, you know, you're a veteran, you're supposed to be like honored and respected, whatever.
Yeah, well, speaking of creating like caricaturish characters in pulp fiction, right? You might as well make them useful. Like make them a veteran means they automatically have a certain skill set that's gonna help the plot. Like with some like the other genre fiction that I read last year, the main character, a woman, is like a nurse. And that just equipped her with like certain useful skill sets.
To make people fall in love with her, was that like the thing? Like,
So that she has
nursing them back
access
health?
to the hot men's bodies.
It's just brilliant. I love that sort of stuff in storytelling. It's so good. Like, how will I make it believable that my character wouldn't miss with a gun? Veteran.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's so fun when you do it right. You know, like when you really commit to it and when you don't like dwell on it too much and you just like run with it. Love it.
Yeah, my one is really simple. It was like, this book is fun. Like, and the most fun things about it is like it kind of takes away from the existential dread. It's like these characters are so well equipped to deal with the horrors. So like, you know, the whole thing about Lovecraft is that like they're never equipped to deal with it. Like they go insane, they go crazy. But I love this. I guess the implicit compliment almost is like all these crazy things happen, and they are totally like well equipped to deal with it because they're already black in America. Like, what's gonna be harder than that? Oh no, like a big spherical object. Like that's fine. Like I'm not worried about that at all. Like, oh, there's tentacles coming out of this black shadow. Like, man, I don't
Unfazed.
care. Like unfazed. And it
Yeah.
makes the characters like seem very like, even if, you know, they're scared or terrified or whatever, they feel safe because they're like, they'll figure it out. And it's kind of
Yeah.
believable that they'd figure it out. I think that's a really cool, like fun part of the book. It's like, it's very adventure heavy. Like it's pulpy in like a Lone Ranger sort of way. Like, a bit Stephen King or whatever, maybe even like,
Yeah, maybe.
I like that way of thinking. It makes me think of when Get Out came out for the first time, and you had that really sort of popular appeal of a movie that sat exactly in what you just described, and sort of this is the reality. And so, you know, what's a weird kind of brain swapping? Wait, is that a spoiler for anyone who's not watched Get Out?
That's a spoiler. No. Don't spoil Get Out. I love that movie so much. That's one of my top movies.
that movie
I don't
has
wanna
been out for
spoil
way
it.
too long. I feel like if you wanted to watch Get Out, you've seen it. You know what I mean?
You get what I'm saying. It's like that.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said, Derek. It's like that constant fear. It's like, of course, he's gonna find a way to survive in the situation
Yeah,
because
he's used to it.
it's just normal, right?
Yeah. It's like another white guy wants to take advantage of me and my family. Like, whoa, well, I'm just going to use the skills and resourcefulness that I already have to deal with it. And I love that you describe them as safe. It's really satisfying to watch a hero like that. But I will say, if we're comparing this to Get Out, I think Get Out is more masterful than this book. I
mean,
think, yeah, Get
Get
Out
had
has
something to say.
Yeah.
Like that's a bit. I think it's an entirely different. Like
That
thing.
is
I
true.
think, like Get Out had something to say. This was.
But Get
like,
Out is still wonderfully pulpy and like gripping.
I actually think it's much. It is, but it's
It
much.
scared the
less.
shit out of me.
Yeah, I was gonna say it
had
actually is
nightmares.
scary.
Yeah.
Like, that's different. But I also love. I also, and maybe this is because like it reminds me. It's not as. I was gonna say as black as like Atlanta, like the show Atlanta. If anyone's ever seen it,
Yeah.
I love Atlanta so much, and Atlanta is in the same way. Like, you know, it's Donald Glover. He's like, it's like the premise is great because he's like, well, it's the most stereotypically like culturally black American thing you could do is like be a rapper, and then he made it into like Twin Peaks. Like this is like, oh, X-Files. Like it's really it's episodic, which I love. It's the characters are constantly seeing insane things, but like they're black in America, they're already seen, like they can just brush off the insane stuff because they've like dealt with so much of it. And I love that way of like living in a surreal world. You're like, well, how different is it? Like
You're
if
so
just
right.
someone walks out of the woods. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love that. That's one of my favorite things. And so it reminds me of it so much, all the fun parts of it, minus the social commentary, I guess.
Cool. Should we move on to the next question? Now let's move on to the most writerly question of them all. This is very exciting. If I were the writer, what would I have changed about the book? I think I have one or two things to say about that. But yeah, Kwame, you look like you have an answer.
I think if I was the writer, I really wanted, and I know it's not the genre, so I'll preface that, but I really wanted more interiority from those characters. I wanted those episodic stories to be longer. Like they could still be episodic, but I wanted more from them. I think I just wanted more of an investigation of that space and that weird commune that we found in the first story, Lovecraft Country itself. Like I want to know more about that structure. Like what is going on there? Who are these people? Like I want like just a bit more detail, I guess. But I was happy for it to be episodic and like that, just maybe longer episodes. I think that's what I would definitely change. Dig a little bit.
Sort of like a deeper exploration almost, right? Like you just want to like what are these things? Like there's a lot of loose ends because it's so tropey, right? Like there's so many like there's a cult, right? But why is there the cult? And it's like you probably couldn't really explain it. You'd have to fabricate something ridiculous. Like
what are the other things that we would have changed about the book if we were to write this? You know, like it's so easy for us to just sit on our asses and not write a single word and be like, this is what I would have done. Well, I'm sure if like we all attempted to write the book, we would have done so much worse.
Yeah.
That, like I mean, I have to say, I think there's a craft to genre, and like I think it was well done, because I also don't usually like genre fiction very much, not in writing anyway. And I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it in the book format, which was like super weird for me. Okay, this is this is not interesting at all to anybody. But did anyone notice when like every now and then they drop the second quotation mark at the end of like a quote?
What? No, I did not notice that.
So, I don't remember the page.
We're too busy skimming, Derek.
There's a part where they drop, and I didn't know if it was like a typo, like but it's
it was one instance.
It's like 4 lines where they do it, and I was like, that's weird. Like, is that intentional? Like, is that a stylistic thing? Well, that's when I noticed it anyway.
I definitely skipped it. Whoop whoop whoop. Sorry.
So I don't know anything.
No, I love it. I love that you brought it up. This is going into the episode.
I don't have anything else interesting to contribute. I don't think I could have done if something else that I would have liked. I shouldn't, but I really liked Caleb. I liked Caleb a lot.
So Caleb is I like that there's a bit of intrigue to his character, right? In the beginning, you're never quite sure if he's on our side or on the enemy's side.
I think
Why do you like him?
One, because one of my favorite like of the Nyarlathotep or something. He's this like avatar of like an ancient cosmic god, and he just walks around creating chaos and making life bad. And I think that character, Caleb Braithwaite, is like a reference to that character. Like that's how I felt
really
reading.
Okay.
Yeah, and I love that he's like evil, but it's also clear that he doesn't like dislike black people at all or anything. Like I thought maybe there might be a bit at the end where like he starts yelling at them and like cursing them and calling them like N-words and all of that sort of thing, and it never happened. Like he was just evil. Like
respectable evil.
He was he was
normal evil.
Yeah, just regular.
Just normal evil.
Progressive and evil.
Do you remember in the magic book episode? Not episode, chapter.
Episode. See, do you see
how geeky and nerdy? How geeky and nerdy this book is. There's a whole chapter about swapping books. I'm like, hell yeah. And then I like in the end, the whole like gravityless chamber scene. I thought that was like a piece of action that's described quite well. I'm sure that would have been exciting in TV form as well to watch.
I actually felt that was quite Lovecraftian in the description of that little space. If there were moments in that story that were Lovecraftian, sort of hinting at a space that sort of is greater and exists outside of our normal space, that was one of those scenes that felt like that sort of traditional Lovecraft.
Yeah. Wow, beautifully put. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we should see. We would have liked to see the writer's do instead of if we had written it.
We would not be able to write it.
I would very badly. No.
Yeah, I would very badly. Now, should we go to the Goodreads reviews?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's just all go to Goodreads because I haven't pre-selected anything. So this is going to be all ad hoc.
I have pre-selected a few that have a running theme.
Oh
my God.
He's doing his work.
Thank you so much. You are the pro.
But they're quite long, so I'm not going to read all of them. But the theme of the couple, I picked in the bad ones because I always love bad reviews. They're the best.
1 stars?
Well, these are 2 stars, so not the worst. But they both said that it actually wasn't Lovecraftian, and that's why they didn't like it, basically. The first line is, Lovecraft Country is a perfect example of how expectations can really dampen a reading experience. And really the whole critique that he has is it just wasn't Lovecraftian enough. Not that the story in itself was bad, just that he had this expectation of more Lovecraft.
I mean, fair, right? The title is Lovecraft Country. And I think it's fair if you go in expecting that. And I understand that he wouldn't have got what he wanted.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that was a she, I think. Never mind.
Oh, shit. Goodreads does not have pronouns, so we don't know. Anyway, the good point here is that, like, I think we reasonably adjust our expectations as we start reading, right?
Yeah.
But I also understand when you have firm expectations. There is a 1-star review by an old-fashioned racist. Race baiting book has nothing to do with Lovecraftian horror except for stealing the name. Matt Ruff's anger at his own perceived white privilege turns this into a constant reminding dialogue on racism in 1950s. No, I did not finish the book. I do not like to suffer through garbage. Poor old HP would punch you if you could. Yeah, well, his own perceived white privilege, guys.
That actually sounds like a lot of the criticisms of when I mentioned Nnedi Okorafor before when she received the award, and she's like, "Oh, I feel really conflicted by this." It was all over the internet, and then there were a lot of people like him who are all like, but you got to keep the race and the politics out of fantasy. Why are these people winning these awards? It's not political, because I guess they don't really understand the personal political dynamic.
No, it's not political for them, isn't it? Like being comfortable is so not political.
Yeah, but I thought that was I love how you just had to look at the guy's picture and you were like, I know who we voted for. I know.
No, I actually completely did not look at his photo. I promise. I just read the word perceived white privilege, and I was like, there you go. Now I'm looking at the photo and I see what you mean.
Yeah, that should be the next.
Do this.
That's the next bust, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God! Like there's a chance that he might listen to this.
I think it's great that I also think that if like a famously racist person would punch you in the face, you must be doing something pretty correctly.
Yeah.
It's like the whole joke is like, of course, like cosmic horror was kind of kickstarted by a white guy, because only like a straight white guy would freak out at the notion that he's not the center of the universe. Everyone else already knows it's not true.
That's a good point. And that's a whole, like, whenever you read about his work, that's like the first thing they mention. It's all about decentering humans as the most important thing.
It's like everyone knows this. Only you don't.
Imagine not being the center, not in charge of your own destiny. Like,
I think a question that I wanted to ask before I totally forgot until now. Kwame, how does this compare to the other like Lovecraft subversions that you've read? Like,
so this is
what's the one for you?
So I think the one for me at the moment, and it's just a novella. It's called The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle, and it sort of very obviously plays on the cosmic horror side of Lovecraft, which I think is the side that everybody that has read Lovecraft is most familiar with. Mm-hmm. And how does this compare to that? I think it's pulpier. And I think that with Victor Laval, even though that was technically science fiction and horror, I think he was sort of, when you read those books they're genre fiction, but they're sort of dancing with the idea of being literary fiction. So they're just on the precipice of being literary fiction without ever committing.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun.
So it's kind of like that in a way. It's got all those pulpy elements, but you can see that there's this deeper conversation happening in the background. But I think it's one of those deeper conversations that only makes sense if you understand the context of what the story is being written in. It's like one of those types of things. It's like, if you know, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod.
Oh my God.
I do love an inside joke. I am a terrible elitist that way. It's pretty fun.
Sometimes that's what literary fiction does, right? It expects prior knowledge. And I don't know. I think one of the things that I love about genre fiction is that it does not expect prior knowledge. I think that makes things more accessible. Although, as a wanker myself, of course, I love an inside knowledge, an inside reference. I'm like, I'm in the club, and that makes it satisfying for me. But probably alienating for a lot of other people, and rightfully so.
But one thing I'd obviously known about, but I hadn't really thought too much about, was the idea of reparations. And
they did that really well. Yeah.
Right. I thought, so it wasn't like I was stupid I was like, they explain it. For someone who doesn't really know too much about it, I know the idea of it. The whole point being I am not even asking for anything more than the fact that you acknowledge that what you did was made me work without any payment. And the fact that you did that means that you don't have to like me, I don't have to like you, but I am owed the money that I earned. And that was really great.
I don't really understand what reparation means.
Well, it's this idea that basically, that if you think of it from the context of colonization, it's like you've made all this money from all this slavery and stuff from these countries. You've extracted all this wealth and you've used it to build, like in UK's context, their big museums and their art galleries and stuff like that. All this
build the entire world.
Yeah,
really.
Basically. But the countries themselves never actually benefited from any of that money. So it's this idea that you are now going to pay that money back, or you're going to help those countries develop.
I get it now, yeah. Then I agree with Derek. I also think it's done really well. I like that it starts off as something very specific, that a family book, yeah. And I like how in the end it's blown way out of proportion, and it also fits into the story, how they're managed to get so much money out of it and also get the book back. I think that's quite well done, and I didn't know about this concept before, but now that you guys have introduced it to me,
it's one of those few instances I'm trying to teach you something. White people, let me explain to you why reparations matters. Imagine that you worked for all these days in your life. And
I like that reparation is a very specific, a very concrete way of thinking about it. And I think that's definitely helpful. As much as, I guess from reading The Color Purple and other things, I tended to think about it in terms of personal freedom and even personal identity and stuff like that. But it's good to narrow it down to just dollar value. And with the interest of inflation across the years, it's a literal value.
They were like, "Where's my inch? Where's my money? Give me my
And I had such respect for the lady who had razor sharp memory. I'm like, yes, girl, write it down.
Yeah, that was great. And then when Montrose is yelling at Caleb, and he's like, "You don't get to get me to be thankful for you paying me what you owe to me."
Yeah.
Get out of here. Give me my money. It was great.
Yeah. I think it's wonderfully satisfying. Kwame, do you have anything to add?
No, just that was probably not the best explanation for what reparations is, so people don't judge me. That was a quick one. But yeah.
I got it. It's okay. We will all do our own research after the episode because it's an important topic and implies to many areas of society. So we are nerds. We will learn. Don't worry.
We are nerds. We will learn. Don't worry. That's very catchy.
Yay! I came up with this. See, I am a writer.
That's my favorite thing about being writing is deciding whether to tell somebody you write or not.
Oh God!
You're like, do I write enough to be considered a writer? What's the threshold for it? How many pages of my novel do I have to have already written?
Well, Kwame used the word lapsed, right?
I haven't written anything in over a year, so am I still a writer? I don't know. Like, do you have to be actively writing a certain amount of time to still do I have to be published or something? Like, published, but that was a very long time ago, and it was like short stories, so does that count? Like, I don't know.
Thank you so much for coming on to LP. I hope you had fun today, Kwame.
Yes. It was great experience. Thanks for humoring me.
I think it's also cool, like, when we're able to talk with books about people other than like ourselves, because sometimes it can be a bit of like
an echo chamber.
Like an echo chamber, and we don't always have like the contextual. Like you, for example, like you've obviously read a lot of science fiction. And,
yeah, that's right. We wouldn't have picked this book otherwise.
Yeah, and it's always great to have other people on, and
yeah, I'm really glad I read the book too.
All right, so we're going to wrap up today's episode here. If you'd like to support LP, head to buymeacoffee.com/licensed poetics. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm your host, Derek.
And I'm your host, Fung-Ling.
And we had Kwame with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great experience.
Everyone, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.